Hey, welcome back to Business 101. We are now on module number 4 in our class, and this is a module on global business, global or international business. And so let me just give you a brief introduction to what you will be seeing in this module. All right, now, global or international business. I sort of use those two terms interchangeably. You will find, perhaps if you go on as a business major to a four-year university or even to grad school, that there are some international business classes and textbooks that make a distinction between those two terms, global business versus international business. I don't in this class. I use the two terms interchangeably. And so when we're talking about global business, we mean the same thing as international business. And just right up front to let you know, those two terms kind of mean the same thing to me. All right. Now, from the very beginning, let's start out. What exactly is global business? Global business, it's my way of thinking, well, it's just business. Okay. In other words, at the root core, right, global business. Business is the noun and global is the adjective, right? So at its core, we're still talking about business. What does that mean? It means all the things we've been talking about, right? Business means revenue minus expenses equals profit. If you don't earn enough profit, you go out of business, right? So it's about trying to earn more revenue than expenses. And quite frankly, business is complicated, right? Or you wouldn't be taking this class, right? Because you have to learn about marketing, you have to learn about accounting, and you have to learn about finance, have to learn about management, have to learn about, there's a bunch of stuff you have to know and learn in order to be a successful business person, right? It's complicated. All business is complicated. So when we talk about global business, it's business and it's complicated. And you've just made it even more complicated because, why? Because now you've started to sell stuff in another country or buy stuff from another country. And that makes it even more complicated than domestic business, quite frankly, because now what? You're selling stuff in another country. You have to worry about transportation. You're dealing perhaps with customers or vendors who don't think the same way that you do, right? We sort of established that in Module 2 when we talked about ethics, right? People develop their ethics through what? A complicated history of what their parents taught them, their friends, what schools they went to, right? Their culture, all that stuff. Well, you're now selling or buying with people in another country and they don't think the way that you do, right? Okay, by definition. Not to mention you're dealing possibly with a currency that's not your own currency, with a government that's different than the government in the country you live in and work in, right? Now things are exponentially more complicated simply because you're now doing business in another country. So at its core, global business is business that's more complicated. All right. Now, there's so much we can talk about global business. In fact, I have taught this class, just international business, as a semester-long class at the four-year level as well as the graduate level. So we don't say everything that we could say about global business in this module. However, we will talk about why global business in the first place. In other words, if global business really is business, which is already complicated, made more complicated because we're doing stuff overseas, why would anyone want to do that? Don't we have enough headaches in our life without making it even more complicated? Well, there has to be some pull, attraction. There has to be something to be gained by taking on all this additional complexity. And you'll look at that. You'll see that in the module. We make the case that consumers get something out of international business, that companies get something out of international business. In fact, national governments get something out of international business. And so all three of them have something to gain, all three of these groups. That's why we deal with international business, right? So you'll see that in the module. What else will you see in the module? You will see a discussion on the concept of competitive advantage, which is crucial to anyone's understanding of how international business actually works. So I want you, as you look through that video lecture and the textbook on absolute advantage versus competitive advantage versus national competitive advantage and comparative advantage. All these terms I'm using, you'll get used to them as you look at the textbook and the video. Be very careful with those. Make sure you understand what's similar and what's different between those terms to really understand sort of the underlying fundamental concepts of international business. Okay, so that's a really important video there. Okay, another really important video there is the one on entry modes. There's going to be a set of concepts there about when a company decides, hey, I want to start selling my stuff in Singapore or in Thailand or in Ukraine or in Italy, right? Wherever it is you want to start selling stuff in another country. How do companies start doing that? Okay, we're going to give you 4 primary ways that companies oftentimes choose to do that. You want to study those and understand what we're saying. You want to understand the pros and the cons of all 4 of those entry modes. How does a company enter into another market in another country? All right. Probably the last video, I think, in this series is also crucially important, has to do with trade barriers. Why do national governments like ours, like the United States government, why does the United States government set up trade tariffs and trade quotas and all sorts of restrictions on companies trying to import stuff in the United States? Why would we do that? Why would we restrict international trade? And what are some of the tools that governments use to restrict international trade if they decide to do that? Why do we have these, what are sometimes called protectionist trade policies? All right. This is all important stuff. It's stuff you read about, well, frankly, every month in the newspaper. You should understand how these things work. If you see some form of protectionist trade policy like a tariff setup or a quota setup or these kinds of restrictions, you should understand what is accomplished by those things as well as what are the disadvantages or the downsides of those kinds of things. We tend to see in the popular press tariffs and quotas almost universally described as bad things. And there is a downside to these kinds of policies. But quite frankly, it's not all downside, and you should realize that. So you need to be able to think clearly as a business person about the ups and the downs of protectionist trade policy. All righty? Those are the kinds of things that we introduce to you in order for you to get a handle on what is this thing called global business and how should I be thinking about this, at least in getting an introduction to global business in this Introduction to Business class. All right? I hope that's helpful. I'm looking forward to see what you have learned after you finish the content in module number 4 in the discussion forum, your post-discussion forum. If you have any questions about anything in module 4, or of course the case study that you're already working on, I hope, right? Don't hesitate to get a hold of me. Other than that, welcome to module 4. I hope you enjoy the content and the experience in this module on global business.